I used to think that mentorship was a great idea. I don't think that way anymore. And in fact, I think there are some aspects of mentorship, especially within spiritual circles, that can be very dangerous. My name is Dr. Felucia, and I'm a licensed psychologist. And in my private practice, I focus on preventing, detecting, and recovering from spiritual abuse. Now, while I will use spiritual abuse as an example, this pertains to all sorts of situations. So, back to mentorship. I don't think it's a good idea. And I didn't used to feel this way. I'm going to explain why I do feel this way now. A lot of you in the comment section of the videos have talked about some really painful and abusive situations that you have experienced as a mentee. I'm going to talk about that, but I'm also going to talk about how being a mentor can also put you at risk. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about the mentee side of things. When you decide to be in a mentorship relationship with somebody, oftentimes there's really not a beginning or an end. And so, one party is probably getting tired and they don't want to do it anymore, but they don't want to say anything. And so, a lot of times you'll see these things just kind of fizzle out. And when something happens like that, it doesn't really it doesn't really sit well with either party. So, that's a big one, right? A lot of times people will say, "Oh, I want to be mentored by this person." And then it's just this never-ending thing. And so that's something to be aware of. And the reason, someone might think, well, okay, just because it's never ending, what's the big deal? I'm going to explain why it is a big deal. Um, I've seen this frequently in mentorship situations because the guidelines aren't clearly defined, the mentor starts to encroach in other areas of the mentee's life. So let's say you are getting mentorship from somebody about, let's see, finances, right? So you have a financial mentor, and then the financial mentor starts criticizing who you're dating, and they say, well, I don't think that person's a good choice for you, or I don't think you should move to this area. That is going way beyond the sphere of what they're supposed to be mentoring you with or mentoring you on. Okay. So think about that. And then also think about, how do these mentor mentee relationships happen? I'm going to talk about this probably in another video, but many of you have talked about how you have felt forced or coerced into certain relationships with other people in your religious or spiritual environment. It could be romantic relationships, it could even be friendships. And that would just drive me nuts. It's happened to me before, and I think that it is so irritating. It reminds me of when you were a kid and your parents said, "Oh, go play with so and so." They didn't like you, you didn't like them, but they're doing that so that the parents can talk or whatever, right? And so there's just something that is very off-putting about being told who to be friends with. And if we look at it from a more serious perspective, it also is controlling, right? As an individual with agency and free will, you should be able to choose who you want to be friends with. And I've said this before, nobody is entitled to a relationship with you. You don't owe anybody a relationship, okay? So a lot of these times, I know people, the way that a mentor and a mentee are put together seem rather arbitrary to me. And even if somebody says, okay, I want this person to be my mentor, that can have its own problems for the reasons that I said, right? We know people, but maybe we don't know them as well as we think. And so, another very dangerous thing about mentorship is that the voice of God and your own gut and intuition slowly get silenced over time. And I've seen this happen to people where, because they've been in so many of these mentorship relationships, they can't make a move unless they've talked about it with their mentor. And that's not healthy. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't get advice or you shouldn't get counsel. I think that's a smart decision from the right people. Maybe you're considering a major life change and you want to run the idea by a few people. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, you're going to be the one that has to live with that decision. And so when you are in this mentor-mentee relationship, you don't learn how to listen to your gut, your intuition, and your discernment. And why that's even more concerning is that in spiritually abusive places, the issue of discernment, the issue of intuition, it's often abused, right? So someone may say that they discern something about you when they're just really using that as an excuse to go off on you or be mean or rude, due to their own insecurity or whatever. So that's why I take issue with that. And, when we have our own intuition and our own discernment, it's a data point. You may not necessarily make a decision entirely based on that, but it's something you don't want to ignore. However, if you are in this mentor-mentee relationship, over time that tends to happen, because think about it, if you have been doing pretty much everything your mentor suggests, and then something comes along and you're like, well, I don't want to do this, then um there's going to be some friction there, right? So I don't recommend that for I don't recommend mentorship for that reason. Another reason too is that it can reduce your self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is a term that psychologists use. It basically means your belief in your ability to do something. I can do this. And so high self-efficacy means you believe, hey, I can get this thing done. That is reduced gradually over time, many times when there is a mentor-mentee relationship. Now, I can hear someone saying, well, I had a mentor and it was fantastic. Good for you, right? I'm sure there are exceptions to every rule. I'm talking about my own experiences and the experiences that I have seen with other people, right? Many times, those types of relationships can reduce your own self-efficacy. And so let's say you decide, you want to like go on vacation or something, and then your mentor is like, well, I don't think that's a good idea. Then you feel caught, and maybe you're like, oh, well, what's wrong with me going on this vacation? And then they tell you XYZ or whatever. The point is you don't have the strength and the wisdom at that point to confidently make a decision. What I'm trying to get at is that your self-efficacy decreases as well as your confidence. And that's going to spread to other areas, right? Because think about it, if you're asking them about your vacation, what else are you not going to ask them about? Um, so that's really important. And another thing that concerns me about mentor and mentee relationships is the power differential. And when I talk about spiritual abuse, that power differential is really important, right? If it doesn't always have to be there for abuse to occur, but it can grease the wheels of the abuse. And so many times, if you seek out a mentor, there probably is some sort of power differential. And so by continuing in that, you are widening that gulf. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can turn into something bad, right? I'm not saying that hierarchies are bad. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have leaders and things like that, but people can abuse that. Think about the this is what I want to talk about, conflict of interest, right? And so let's say that you are getting mentored by a woman, right? And you are interested in a guy, and you're like, oh my goodness, I really like Peter. He's so handsome, and I really like him, and I think he might like me. And your mentor's like, I don't think that's a good idea. And you're like, well, why? What, Peter, he's cute. What do you have against him? I just don't know. Something in my spirit's just saying he's not the right man for you. And, I don't think he has the maturity and the leadership. and I just don't think it's a good idea. And so every time you bring up Peter, she is more adamant that you should not date him, right? She's like, no, I don't think so. And then maybe later, she sees something on your Facebook or whatever social media post with you and Peter together. And she's like, I thought I told you to stay away from that guy. And, nothing's happened yet. Maybe the two of you just went on a date. So this mentor is like, do not date this man. And then later you find out that she has feelings for Peter and asked him out, right? Now, this might sound a little messy and, soap opera-ish, but stuff like this happens, right? And so you really have to know what are the motives of the mentor that you have? Are they using their influence to get you to do what they want or to get you to do what is in your best interest and to listen to God, right? And so many of the stories that I have heard that doesn't happen. Okay. And I'm talking, in this case, I'm talking about the harm to the mentee. I mean, yeah, the mentee, but there's also harm for the mentor, right? One more thing I'm going to talk about with the mentee is that you could be unknowingly submitted to someone else's agenda. In the example that I just gave, right? Let's say so this person, she wants Peter, and so she's telling you to stay away from him, and then she's dating him later. Another instance could be, let's say you have a mentor and they're really telling you to spend your money a certain way, right? Maybe you're like, oh, I got into the school, and there's some money you have to pay, and they're like, no, don't do that. And maybe the reason they're not wanting you to go to school or pay this money is because the leadership has told them, hey, we need all hands on deck here. Maybe they have some project that they didn't ask anybody about, and so they want everybody, all hands available. And so this person is, I'm telling you this, but it's not for your best interest. It's for, the pastor or whoever. My point is you don't know who is on the other side of that conversation, right? They could be feeding you information and telling you things not because it's best for you, but it's best for someone else. Okay. So I talked about how it is difficult for the mentee, but can also be very difficult for the mentor, right? Especially if you have been put in a situation where you just get paired off with somebody, right? This person needs help, go help them. I don't like that. That's probably another video for another time, but these sorts of things, when you are told or, told basically to mentor somebody, you may not know a lot about that person, and that person could be very draining. I have heard from people who have done these sorts of things that they have felt so drained by the person that they were mentoring. This person's calling them at all hours of the night. They're basically providing them free therapy, and all kinds of other things. They're basically like abusing that relationship and they're abusing the kindness of the mentor. They might be doing things like showing up at their door. I got kicked out. I need a place to stay. I'm staying with you. That's nobody should have to go through that. And so, I know that's a lot of mentors have been through very difficult things. Another thing too, when I remember I talked about what's on the other side of the mentor or mentee relationship, but you could be unknowingly feeding into some drama, right? Maybe you could tell, let's say you tell the mentee, you know, I don't know, maybe tell them that you have concerns about their relationship, and then the person that you have concerns about now comes to where you are and starts threatening you and saying, oh, you told them to break up with me and all this other stuff. The point is some of these mentees may have a lot of messiness going on in their lives that they need professional help for. Not And you're not supposed to be that professional help, right? So it can be very draining, and because a lot of times they don't have parameters around this sort of stuff, somebody usually gets drained. I don't like the idea, and I don't think it's healthy for someone to be unconditionally available to anybody at all times. I don't think it's healthy. Even, for those of us who are parents or married, we are not always 100% available every time to our kids and our spouses. So why should it be this case for the mentee? And it can just turn bad in all kinds of ways. So I don't recommend it anymore. And from what I've seen from it, I don't see really any kind of like any benefit from it, right? For some people, the being a mentor gives them sort of like an ego boost, right? So some people who are very controlling love these types of things because they're like, I told this person to do this. They're basically running someone else's life and they get a boost from it, especially if they have narcissistic tendencies. That could be supply for them, So what I mean by supply, it's basically what fuels narcissistic people, attention and all this other stuff. And so basically they get to walk away being the hero. But it can also be difficult for the person, who is doing the mentoring. I talked about what happened before. Sometimes I can give you an example that happened way back in the day, but somebody was I would just say engaged in some foolish behavior, right? And so they were like, well, can you mentor me? And I said, why? And they were like, well, I'm struggling with this thing, but they had no intention of like stopping that thing, right? So I'm not going to say what the thing was, but basically, let's just use shoplifting as an example. So maybe this person is like, I need mentorship because I have this thing with shoplifting. But then they also like are not planning to ever stop. Do you see what I mean? So you have to be really careful. And I told that person, no, I'm not going to mentor you. And this is what I think you should do instead. And then that led to all kinds of stuff. And they didn't like me and were shooting me dirty looks. Hey, that's life, right? But that's another thing too. When you set boundaries with people sometimes and they act a certain way, you learn about them. But I was like, I am not co-signing this foolishness. Don't bring me into it because when you do stuff like that, that person could be like, well, she said it was okay. You know how like kids sometimes will tell one parent like half of the story and then tell the other parent half of the story and then they're like, well, mom said I could do this, but you know what I mean? So that can happen with, for lack of a better word, a mentee who is just messy and has a lot going on in their lives, right? And then they can also be very draining. And in addition to that, there really is no end. Now, I can hear some people say that's really a function of the people and not the mentorship model itself. And I can respect that. I think that if you do want to engage in mentorship or having a mentee, I would recommend that it is very specific and very time limited. And I would even write something out. Like, let's say you want so and so to mentor you. Like, okay, I would like to get mentored in the area of, I don't know, like running an arts ministry at a church, right? And so you have a specific parameter of it, you have a beginning and you have an end. So maybe you say, I'm going to do this thing with you for 3 months. And then after 3 months, we can decide whether we want to continue or not. Many of these mentorship things have no end. I can't think of any where the people were like, okay, we're going to end. It's just, it's this relationship for life, it feels like. And that's a lot. So if you're going to do it, I would recommend, first of all, knowing the person really well, and that's the mentee and the mentor. I would not recommend doing that with someone you don't know. Just because someone has a particular skill doesn't mean that they're going to be a good mentor or mentee. So I would say really know them very well. Vet them like you would vet somebody that you would date. Have a beginning, have an end, and just have it really be specific and also make it known that either of you can leave at any time. Um, and that should be stipulated and that should be important. And if you feel off about it, just don't do it. I, prefer a consultation model, right? Or, you could say that you're getting consultation on something and just make it really specific. You could say consultation, you could say, learning, whatever it is. But the point is, you are the one who's going to have to answer to yourself for the decisions you make. So move accordingly. So I'd like to hear from you all in the comments. Do you agree? Do you think mentorship is good? If you had good experiences, bad experiences, let me know in the comment section, and I will see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day that's filled with peace. Bye bye.